Hi, everybody. I am so sorry that we are late. I've had some rather stressful technical issues at my end. I'm going to do away with all of the graphics, so forgive me that they are not here. But what is important and who is here is Burr Carroll. Thank you so much for joining me today, Burr.
Hi, Sandy. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I just nearly pulled my earphones out. It's going to be one of those days, I think, with technology.
Oh, dear.
Yeah,
And
poor
it's,
Sandy. I can feel your stress.
I don't drink and I think I need a wine. Anyway, as I said, the main thing is that you are here. So let's kick on. We do have a giveaway today, and I had a beautiful graphic done up for that, but we'll have to go without.
I can help. I can help with that, Sandy.
Okay, thank you,
I
Bert.
have the book. I have the book. So we have a copy of who we were in the giveaway, and I also have these beautiful lollipops, which I can recommend because I've been indulging in these whenever whenever my sugar levels have got low, and yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. And so we will leave the giveaway open for anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question, whether that be here during the live stream or if you're watching this back at a later date, we'll leave the giveaway open until midday Sydney time on Saturday for that beautiful copy of Burr's book and her lovely lollipops. Burr and I are here today to talk about what happens when an author switches genre and how they do it successfully, like Burr has done. Now, Burr, you started in women's fiction and you had 7 successful novels in that genre. What was it that made you switch to domestic suspense? Was it a natural progression for you or a conscious decision?
It was a natural progression and it was a conscious decision. It was actually both. I think that by the time I'd finished that 7th novel, I had exhausted everything about women's fiction that all the themes, all the relationships, all the dynamics of family life. And I felt, and particularly my novels, they were half based in Australia, half based in Ireland. And so I was continuously examining, that idea of people moving from one side of the world to the other and why they might do that. And I felt I'd just reached a dead end. I had nothing more to say on the fact on that topic. Mm-hmm. And then also in my early novels, I did have quite a bit of intrigue, and these were the heydays of women's fiction, particularly in the UK and Ireland, where a lot of women's fiction was being written at the time. And I remember an editor saying to me at one point, I think it was at my 2nd novel, she was like, "Oh, why do you keep everything from the reader? Why don't you tell the reader that earlier in the book? And why does this have to be a secret, Burr?" So I toned it down a little bit after that particular discussion, and then towards the end of the later novels, I started creeping in again, and so it was always something that was kind of part of my writing, and that I quite enjoyed, keeping back something from the reader.
And so, when you decided to make that switch and to leave women's fiction behind, why domestic suspense? Why not fantasy or straight up crime or any of the other genres that you could have chosen from?
I'm too soft for straight up crime. And I still don't read straight up crime. It scares me a little bit. And I guess with me, I love the idea, and the thing about domestic suspense and domestic noir and psychological suspense is that, and it's real people, real situations, and I was able to probably draw on all that kind of research and thought I'd put into families and friendships and relationships and what goes wrong in them and where they go off the rails. And I was able to give that a little bit of a darker twist. And it was really rejuvenating to my writing to, change track like that, because I felt like I was starting off again and, on a very steep learning curve. So I definitely was too soft for crime. And the other thing I would say, I'm probably a bit too real for fantasy. I like books that I can believe, why something has happened, that I can see myself in that situation. I'm going to go, and I really sympathize with the character, even though they might have done something really awful. I sympathize with what's happened because I can see how they've got to that place.
Mm-hmm. All right. The first novel that you wrote in this new genre was The Missing Pieces of Sophie McCarthy. And I wanted to ask you, how has your writing changed since you've swapped genres? Do you have a different approach now, or is it much the same?
I do have a different approach. For a start, and we did have this for our graphics.
We
I've
did.
started to employ a spreadsheet to try and keep track of the characters and the plot and what is happening and the different twists and turns. And I've discovered that, suspense is a lot more mathematical in some ways than, domestic fiction. Domestic fiction and women's fiction, you can get into the story, you can take your time to build it up, but there's a different pace happening with suspense. You need to keep the reader engaged, you need to trick the reader, you need to have lots of twists and turns, and that's a hard thing to keep track of. So I've been employing a spreadsheet to keep track of that. I find that the writing needs to be a lot more to the point, and the reader is not really necessarily reading the book for a one-page description of what the street looks like on that day, or what somebody is wearing, or they might not be reading any book for that, actually, or any type of book.
Literary fiction.
maybe, and and the other thing I've discovered is that the genre does lend itself to more characters, because you're trying to surprise the reader, you're trying to trick them, you're trying to not have them guess too early, and you do need a few people at play and a few characters that at least the reader is suspecting all the way through, and then they all come with their own friends and family. And so my last two books, there have been quite a cast of characters, and in both of them, in The Missing Pieces of Sophie McCarthy and in Who We Were, there are 7 different perspectives in the novel.
I'm going to come back to that, but I've thought of a workaround to show the spreadsheet that you did send through to me.
Oh, good.
Again, for those joining late, I apologise. I've had some technical difficulties, so all my beautiful graphics won't be here today. I'm going to hold this up. Oh, no, we're going to get too much light, aren't we? No, it's not going to work. But I can show you the that shows you.
Oh, you can see it in the distance.
Color-coded.
Yeah.
And it's got times and dates and color codes and descriptions, and it's quite in depth, really. I could never be that organized myself. Is the title, or is this the working title? Because I think it's fantastic, but I don't want to say it.
That particular one, that is the actual title. I have to thank Petronella McGovern for that title, actually.
The title,
we can say it.
You Had It Coming. I love that title.
Yes. So it was called something else, and I was at late stage editing, and I was having lunch with Petronella, and there was a blurb on the back, and as she was reading the blurb about the book, she said, "Oh, you had it coming," and that's what it said in the blurb. Somebody said that, and then she said, "That's a good title," and I thought, that is a good title. Thank you very much, Petronella. So I should put, the front of the book should be, "You Had It Coming," with her rights underneath it before my name.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you have 7 points of view in your novels. Now, for anyone who's just starting out writing, one of the golden rules, we're told, is to not have multiple points of view, and I break that rule as well. I usually have 3 points of view. 7 is a lot to wrangle. How do you do that? How do you make sure that each of those points of view has enough page time and keep the reader turning from one to the other?
I've no intention of ever doing it again. Um, but I will say with the missing pieces of Sophie McCarthy, that was originally 9 points of view, and I had to, during editing, condense it down to 7, and that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life, because the editor really liked the 2 extra points of view and wanted me to keep their thoughts, which is impossible if you're not in their head. So with Who We Were, because it's a school reunion, it really did demand, if I wanted to create a realistic sense of a cohort, it did demand, a lot of characters and a lot of points of view, and look, and that's where the spreadsheet came in. It is really tricky to do, and when I talk about the spreadsheet, I'm making myself sound like a great planner, and I'm not. When I wrote the novel first time round, it was just purely on instinct. It was, oh, we haven't heard from Zach for a while, he needs to, we need to check in with him. Oh, we haven't heard from Annabelle, we need to get back to her. So I wrote it organically, and then went back and said, well, this is how it looks like, this is where we're hearing from everybody, this is what the reader knows at this point. And so it was really helpful afterwards rather than before the fact.
Right. So you use that spreadsheet during the editing process rather than before you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I wouldn't recommend any writer to have 7 points of view. It really is. And that was my 8th novel. So, you had
experience to back it up.
I had experience, and I knew that it was a really hard thing to do. But there were things that I did, I would take one of the characters and take all their chapters and look at all their dialogue and make sure that they sounded different, and that they had certain things about how they spoke and how they thought that identified them to the reader. And with Sophie McCarthy, it was, some of those characters were her parents, her mum and her dad. There's a child. So the characters were very distinct to the reader, I think. It was more difficult with Who We Were because all of the characters, because they all went to school together, they were all the same age. So that was harder.
Yeah. Tracy's left us a comment that the most points of view that she has read in a book is 3. And that would be standard when people are doing points of view. So I think, Tracy, you need to get your hands on either The Missing Pieces of Sophie McCarthy or Who We Were, and just to see how well it can be done, because you do it so masterfully, and I suspect that is down to the experience that you bring with you.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
Okay. Did you take anything from your experience other than just writing, but anything specific from those women's fiction novels that you wrote that you found helpful when you were writing domestic suspense?
A big thing really is families and their dynamics and, how they work. And I love books in domestic suspense that kind of have a good family at its core, and you go, oh, I know a dad like that, or oh, I know a mum like that, or oh my God, I know somebody like that in the schoolyard, or oh, I know a kid like that, and you can see it. So that I love those books. Lisa Jewell does that really well, and I always feel like I really like her characters. I really like them, even if they're doing something that's not so nice. I really like who they are, and I recognize who they are. So it really helped me to have written women's fiction, because I had written about that for 7 novels. And one thing that was hard, though, was because I had examined quite a lot of different themes through those earlier novels, my motivations were sort of contracted as a result, or the reasons that people do things. If I have examined something in novel 4, or, had a certain theme, I didn't want to, redo it in novel 10, even if it made perfect sense. If you're saying to yourself, why would somebody do that terrible thing? Well, this is one of the reasons, but sorry, I've already written about that back whenever. So I've had to get more and more creative about why people do what they do, really. So did I answer that question?
Yeah. exactly. And I guess domestic suspense does give you that scope to go a little bit deeper and a little bit wilder into why somebody might behave the way they do.
Oh, it is so much fun, Sandy. I recommend it. It's really therapeutic. You know, I had so much fun writing Sophie Mccarthy. So much fun. I could see her in my head. I knew people who were exactly like her. You know, those people who you half hate and half admire. And we've all worked with people like that. And I loved that being able to have her, you know, be that hard and cutting, but she was still realistic, I hope.
Yeah.
And there were certain arguments I had with the editor about her, because the editor wanted me to go completely crazy and have her slashing, you know, tires and doing crazy stuff. And I was like, no, Sophie wouldn't do that. Sophie, you know, Sophie's way above that type of behavior. So I had a lot of fun with Sophie McCarthy, and it was a, you know, a real kind of, I suppose, I love the fact that readers felt sorry for her, which was what I was trying to achieve, that they, you know, may not necessarily like her, but they certainly felt sorry for her and sympathized for her predicament.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think a character has to be completely likable to be a great leading character, but we have to be able to relate to them in some way, whether that's we see a little bit of ourselves in a tiny little bit of them, or we know somebody like that, or we at least understand their motivations, you know, but we don't have to like them so much.
In women's fiction, maybe, and maybe with your novels, you might, you there is a requirement for the character to be liked, maybe more so than in, you know, suspense. Do you find that with your novels?
Yeah, I think so, because the journey in novels like mine is with that main character. That's why you're reading it. You're going on their journey with them. Whereas in domestic suspense or crime or anything down that road, you're going for the story, you know, and you're trying to figure out who did it or why they did it or what was done. And so I think it's a slightly different focus for readers, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very liberating to have a character who the reader doesn't have to like. It's a lot of fun. So Sandy will have some interesting character pop up in her next book.
Yeah, I might do, yeah. Explore that a little bit more. Tracy has said that she will look out for your books, and she thinks her mum in particular will like them. And she also mentioned that readers do notice when authors use repeated themes and content. And I just want to address this for a little bit. I know myself, I'm up to book 4. I'm currently rewriting that one. And it is easy to fall into that trap of that theme or that content that you know so well. And I've had to make a very conscious decision not to include something in this that I was going to include, because I know that I've done it before. How do we as authors avoid falling into that trap?
I don't know. And I think it's the more books you've got under your belt, the harder it becomes to come up with fresh material that's, you know, new and interesting, but also believable. It's certainly my biggest challenge at the moment is creating, and even, you know, even down to names. You know,
yes,
I have had that many, you know, of course, you know, with Sarah and James and, you know, like across 10 novels, that's a lot of names and a lot of secondary characters and, you know, minor characters, and trying to even avoid the names without coming up with all these weirdly unusual names. And you can only have so many unusual names because readers don't, you know, want that many unusual names either. So even coming up with names is pain. And you know, how many times have you written a scene where a cup of tea has been made, and how many times have you written a scene where there's, you know, the characters had a shower and had water cascading down her, you know, over her face, or, you know, she's lathered her hair or whatever. So I find that is absolutely my biggest challenge at the moment, is trying to find fresh material and fresh ways of saying things.
Cheryl's left us a comment that she usually does like the characters in women's fiction. She's mentioning a book where she didn't like them. And I think that's an interesting point, that that certain genres require, oh, sorry, not require, but have a certain expectation about them.
Yeah. Yeah. Although you do, I think with domestic suspense, there may be a character or two in there, that you don't like. But it is really hard to write a book where if you don't like anybody. So there are redeeming characters. There's always redeeming characters, and there's always characters in suspense, and even in crime. Really, you want to like someone. You always want to get behind someone. It's just you've got a bit more leeway in terms of characters that the reader doesn't need to like. You've got a license to.
I had this conversation with Kyle Perry when he was on after I read The Bluffs, and I didn't like the police detective who was the main character of his story, but I really liked the drug dealer, and that threw me completely.
I know that was illogical, but I thought that was really clever with that book. I thought that was really clever, because really they were not a good family, were they? Honestly, they were just. Would you like them as your neighbors? Would you like them as your neighbors? And I was reading it, and I was like, how do I really like these people? So I thought he was really clever to evoke that sense of, that we got behind the drug dealer.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that.
But he was a really likable drug dealer. But again, you sort of knew why he was doing what he was doing. And that is the art of it. You understood his predicaments, and so you forgave him.
Yeah, and this comes back to what you just said, that as a reader, even if there are unlikable characters, if we can latch on to one of those characters, then we're in for the ride and we're in for the journey.
Yeah.
So, Tracy's mentioned Eleanor Oliphant, which I haven't read, that she said she was really unlikable, but by the end of the story, you want to give her a big hug.
Yes. I really liked Eleanor Oliphant. I liked I think, was it Ray? I can't remember her beau in that particular, or her friend. I really liked the friend, and it's although I've just finished a Liz Nugent book where I didn't like any of the characters. I still enjoyed the book, weirdly, because her writing is so good, but I didn't like any of the characters. They really were awful. They truly were obnoxious. And they were a family, actually, too. They were a family. It's called Our Little Cruelties. It's her latest one.
Right. But do you think that was a deliberate device on her part to make them so unlikable?
I don't know, because her first novel, Unraveling Oliver, was probably the best novel I've ever read for somebody who's done the character Oliver, had done something truly atrocious, and you felt so sorry for him, and it was masterfully done. I completely, felt sorry for him. So with this latest novel, I don't know whether she intended to, it was a family. It was three brothers, and maybe it's my husband read it first, and he was less forgiving of the fact that nobody was likable at all in the book. Where I just love her writing, so I did get over it, but I did put it down so many times, going, oh my goodness, they are awful.
Cheryl mentioned that she loved Eleanor as well. My next question for you, Ber, is, seeing as you've changed your focus as a writer, has that changed your reading habits in any way?
Maybe a little bit. So I definitely, at the moment, my favorite read is, that domestic suspense. And I love it when I read a good one. And really, when I get a good one, I'll read it in a day, 2 days at most. And I guess if I go back 10 years, I was definitely reading more women's fiction, at the time. And but I always probably enjoyed those books that, Jodi Picoult, Jojo Moyes, where you didn't kind of know the whole story. I've always enjoyed a book where you don't know the whole story. And so it has changed my reading, but at the moment I'm reading Monica McInerney's The Godmothers, which is a
Oh, yes.
delve into my old reads, and it's really a lovely book. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, I finished that 2 nights ago. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was a really good read. Just on this, I know when I read within my own genre that I write, I tend to be able to see where the story's going, and I can usually pick the twists within stories that fall in my own genre. Now that you're writing domestic suspense, do you find it easier to pick those twists and turns and the whodunits when you're reading them as well?
Yes, I do. I do find it easier to see, and it's really annoying actually,
Yeah.
because I'm becoming a very critical reader, and I don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to take a step back and just enjoy the book for the book, and not to be constantly analyzing, saying, "Oh, well, there's a clue, and there's a clue," and I know readers do that to a certain extent. They spot the clues and collect the
Sure.
clues, but I'm probably a bit too analytical about it. But it's impossible as a writer to be, a completely to read and just read. It's impossible. You've got that part of your brain switched
Yep.
on the entire time, saying, what are they doing now? Where are they going?
Yeah. Yes.
With Who We
Thanks.
Were, I was very happy because, a few people who are very hardcore, crime readers didn't know who did it and what was going to happen. So I was particularly happy to hear that. So.
That's good. I find that I also annoy my teenage daughter when we're watching movies that would fall into that, rom-com, women's fiction, even
Yeah.
dramas. And I'm going, oh, well, such and such is going to happen. And she looks at me and I'm always right. And she gets so annoyed with me because I've
Yes.
completely ruined the film for her. So.
But let's face it, Sandy, they're not hard to pick, are they? So
No, not
I
you.
was watching one of my daughter recently. It was a Jennifer Aniston one, and I started doing that. And then she started doing that. It was actually quite fun. And we had the whole story worked out halfway through. So, but it's still fun.
Maybe this is why Emily hasn't watched a movie with me for a long time now. Oh, dear. Michelle Parsons does it as well. Now, this would normally be the point where I would move you and I over to the side and put up a beautiful graphic of you and your 2 latest books and your contact details where we can find you online, which obviously I can't do. Where can we find you if we want to find you online, Bert?
You can find me on Facebook, and you can find me on Twitter. And you can, go on my website. So
just a search for Burr Carroll?
Burr Carroll or BM Carroll. I think my handle is at BM Carroll.
What I might do actually is when we've finished this off, I will pop up those graphics in the comments section. And so that people can have a look. That might be the way to do it. So I'm going to start wrapping this up. I have one more question for you. So if anyone else out there in the audience has a question, pop them in now for Burr. If you were to change genres again, Burr, where do you think you would go? Is there a genre that you would love to have a crack at but maybe a bit too scared of yet?
I have had a crack at young adult, and I wouldn't mind having another crack at that. That was actually quite fun. So I have a half-finished novel of a young adult that I started writing a few years ago, and it was fun. It was. It's always really fun to write something new. I don't think I would go crime because I don't start my novels thinking that somebody's died. I start my novels thinking that somebody might die. But having said that, in the novel coming out in May, somebody dies in the first chapter. And it is called You Had It Coming. So it does sound, it might be slightly darker than the other ones. But the character has a really good reason for saying that. And look, that maybe young adult will be it. Not fantasy, ever. Ever.
No.
I'm too much of a realist for fantasy. So
Dear Helen was going to ask the question that I just asked you, so she's very thankful. Petronella has popped in your website into the comments, and as I said, I will put in the graphics once we're done. Michelle Parsons has a question, and we haven't answered this one yet, Michelle. What has surprised you most about writing domestic suspense?
How much fun it is, considering it's a dark matter. It's, dark topic. Last week I was researching how long it takes a body to defrost, and this week I was researching, how you dispose of a body in the ocean and how deep the ocean was, and I was kind of smiling while I was doing that, which is really bad. But it is sort of a break from, my son is doing his HSC at the moment. It's kind of fun being online, away from the real world, and figuring out how deep is the ocean, so you can figure out, well, is that a good place to dump a body? So it's probably that it is actually fun, even though the themes are quite dark.
I'm just going to give Triple O a call and put you on a watch list.
Honestly, if somebody ever looked at, I'm sure it's the same for every author. If somebody looked at our Google history, it would be very concerning, really, really concerning.
Well, even I've had to do that within women's fiction, which you would not expect to have to do that. I've had to research what the statute of limitations of murder is. Of different crimes, and
what is it, Sandy? There isn't one, is there?
There isn't one in New South Wales, but there is in other states.
See, so that's useful to know. Thank you.
For all of you out there. Tracy said, yes, it would be very interesting to see your Google history. And Helen's got a question, and we might make this our last question. Time-wise, has it taken the same time to write the two different genres?
My later novels I've written faster than my earlier novels, but I think I've just got better at writing novels. I would say yes, it takes the same time, and the fact that I'm producing novels a little bit quicker than what I was earlier in my career, I think is down to the fact that I know a bit better what I'm doing. When I started off, I had no idea what I was doing, so. I've had plenty of practice.
And as with anything in life, the more you do something, the better you get at it, right?
Yes, that's true. Especially with writing, especially with writing.
Yeah. Michelle's just had a little go at me, saying that that's because I keep killing off my characters. Well, it is fun. I actually do enjoy it, killing off characters, and that's what I'll be doing this afternoon once we're finished here. So. And Victoria is laughing at our Google histories. So thank you, Ber, so much for joining me. And I apologise to you and to the audience that the technical side of things wasn't as on point as it normally is. And I will, once we shut this down, go into the comments and put up some of those graphics. Don't forget to look out for the draw to win a signed copy of Who We Were from Ber. And I think it would make a great Christmas present, don't you, Ber?
Yes, and don't forget there's lollipops as well too.
And the lollipops.
Although you may not want to gift those. Honestly, they are so nice. Those lollipops, they're so tasty. I had to taste one, because I got 300 of these lollipops delivered before COVID. And there's still quite a lot of them in my house, but I had to taste them before, using them for different promotional things. And I have to say they helped my writing a lot. So I had a nice sugar hit, and as any author knows, having a sugar hit helps you write. It makes you write better.
Yeah, well, you can't give them to your readers if you haven't tried them yourself, can you? No, that's right. Thank you so much.
Enter the competition for the lollipops.
Yeah, that's
in closing. Thanks, Sandy. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you all again next week.
Thank you, Sandy. Bye.